Kusu family, welcome to another episode of the Pan-African Family Cooking Show. We have a pretty exciting episode this week. We're going to talk about the ways that the health benefits of vegan cooking impact Black neighborhoods and Black families from a socioeconomic standpoint. And we're going to do that through a very tasty treat, sort of a fun meal. We're going to be making a vegan cake. One of the things that is prohibitive about vegan diets, and for our people recognizing a lot of those health benefits, is that a vegan diet can sometimes be a difficult thing to shop for in the grocery store. It's often more expensive. There are often confusing ingredients on packaging, and the prepackaged and sort of plant-based vegan section of the grocery store has so many different types of options that it can be confusing. Today we're going to talk about ways to simplify that and to think about a plant-based, animal-free diet from a much more simplistic standpoint, lessening the number of ingredients, reducing the complication in that kind of an eating, that kind of a dietary plan. One of the reasons that's important is because our communities face food insecurity at levels that have not changed that much from the 40s and 50s. When we think about neighborhoods in places like New York City or Chicago, or even places like Atlanta and Los Angeles, the idea of food insecurity, which means the inability to reliably and dependably provide enough food for yourself and your family, that impacts somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 20% of the families in places like New York City. One of the things that contributes to food insecurity are food deserts. Food deserts, generally speaking, refer to the pockets of any metropolis, any sort of metro area where the acquisition of fresh produce and healthy foods, non-processed foods, is scarce or impossible. So if you live in certain sections of, say, the Bronx, you might not have any grocery stores, no Whole Foods, no ShopRite, no Piggly Wigglies. You might not have any of those kinds of grocery stores where you can go and buy apples or bananas or even milk and things like that in a reasonable commute to where you live, which means that you have to now depend on or rely on the bodega if you're in New York, or the corner store if you are in a place in the South where you refer to them as the corner store, or a gas station if you're in a more suburban neighborhood that is experiencing or suffering from food deserts. But when you're in places like New York or even Chicago and LA, these big major cities, those cities do have more resources available to them. So in New York, for example, I've volunteered with a group called City Harvest, and they respond to food insecurity and the pressures that food deserts put on poor communities by providing food pantries and making the effort to provide food and service the community via soup kitchens and things like that. But those are emergency responses, so they're typically inefficient, and they're not a satisfactory way to deal with food insecurity from a long-term standpoint. And certainly the people that are using those food kitchens don't have any say at all in what they're consuming. You can't go to your food kitchen and ask for the vegan meal. It's not a restaurant, but those things are still helpful. If we think about other communities, if we think about places, say, in the rural South, if we think about cities that are in the southern or in the Midwestern United States, where poor communities exist, where Black and brown communities exist, those are even more at risk. And when there are food deserts in those kinds of communities where you could have to go 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 miles before you can get to a grocery store, you can see how the crisis is even more substantial. Let's take a city like Birmingham, for example, Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama is really a classic example. It's really an interesting case of the contrast between the haves and the have-nots and how food insecurity relates to that. Birmingham, maybe a year or two ago, 2018, 2019, went through a significant food renaissance. There were a lot of name brand chefs, James Beard Award winners, who were opening up restaurants where pop-up experiences were happening. There was a heavy focus on farm to table and all of these buzzwords that you hear on the Cooking Channel or on Food Network that promote healthy eating and sustainable cooking and all of these sorts of things. In a city like Birmingham, that was steeply contrasted by the Black and brown communities who had actual food deserts, who didn't have access to a grocery store where they could buy fresh produce, and certainly not the funds to be having culinary dining experiences at James Beard Award winning restaurants. One of the things that impacts that, and we talked about food deserts and why they exist and how they exist, the reason why they are almost always in Black and Latino neighborhoods is directly related to the redlining problem and the fight for civil rights historically. If we look at a map of a city like Birmingham, and you look at what redlining did to that map, and then you drop it on top of the map of Birmingham today, you'll notice that the food deserts that exist line up with all of the redline districts. When we think about Birmingham, the bombing that they experienced in the church there during the civil rights movement, and any neighborhood, not just Birmingham, any neighborhood from Baltimore to Philadelphia to Chicago to Watts to New York, where there has been unrest, where there have been people fighting for their freedom and for their rights. What happens after that settles down is that the city and insurance companies collude to label those neighborhoods at risk, or high risk, or troubled, or impoverished, any of these real estate buzzwords. What that does is it first depresses property values. But the other thing that people don't talk about is it has a direct impact on insurance. So if you're a grocer, if you want to open up a grocery store, you now all of a sudden have trouble getting a loan, and you can't get insurance in those neighborhoods. So the advent of a food desert isn't some random phenomenon that doesn't have traceable roots. It is a direct result, of white supremacy and the challenges that we face, and gives us primary information, primary evidence about the need for Black liberation. And a vegan diet, food resistance, agro-resistance, Afro-veganism are all ways to respond to that, because unlike what we think about when we think about vegan diets, where you have an impression of someone who lives in a place like, Berkeley, California, or LA, or Brooklyn, usually a white person. When we talk about Afro-veganism, we can't have that conversation without talking about the economics of it, without talking about resistance to capitalism, without talking about the health consequences on a community from a socioeconomic standpoint and a health standpoint. That is at the heart and at the root of Afro-veganism. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make a couple of very, very simple cake recipes that demonstrate how, for very, very little money and very few ingredients, you can make something that is a treat. I'm going to show you ways that you can make it healthy for your family, and it can replace the things that you would get at a bodega, because if you've got your kid's birthday, typically you're going to go to the bodega if you're in one of these food deserts, and you're going to buy a box cake from like Pillsbury or Duncan Hines or one of these food manufacturers. They're going to be loaded with things like hydrogenated oils, palm oils. It's going to have powdered and processed egg products in it, and dairy products in it, and tons of sugar and sodium. So I'm going to show you how you can use simple ingredients right in your kitchen and create a vegan cake that is both delicious to eat and also has much better health consequences for you. Now, the exciting part about this show is that I have got a couple of extra special guests that are going to help me with this. These two guests that I'm about to invite on actually are who help put the family in Pan-African Family Cooking Show. So I want to welcome to the show my niece and my nephew.
Kusu family. I'm Tegan. And I'm Madison.
So guys, are you ready to help me bake a cake?
Yes.
All right, let's go through our ingredients. We are going to use whole wheat flour, which is a much healthier option than using white flour. If you didn't have whole wheat flour, if there wasn't access to whole wheat flour, you could certainly substitute the white. But the nice thing about whole wheat flour is that it's going to give you more protein and more fiber than in a bleach product, and it is a less processed type of flour. In this case, we're using regular whole wheat flour. You could also use 00 flour if you could find it in the grocery store, which is just a finer type of flour, but it's not necessary. We're going to use a couple of different kinds of oils, both olive and canola. We've got some granulated sugar, we've got some strawberry jam, and we've got some organic amber agave for sweeteners. We're going to use coconut cream along with that sugar that's going to help us with the icing for our cake. And then our liquids are going to be some orange juice and just some plain water. We've got some baking powder so that our cakes rise nicely. We're going to flavor our cakes in a couple of different ways. We're going to do one that's got a lemon flavor. We're going to use vanilla, and we're also going to use coffee, cinnamon, and cardamom to create an interesting depth of flavor for one of the cakes. And then our utensils, we've got various measuring cups. We've got our whisk. We're going to be using our hand mixer pretty heavily today. We're going to be using our sifter to make sure that we get the finest level of flour possible. And then we've got our pans, which you'll notice I've actually got pre-oiled. They're pre-greased with canola oil. And since we're making a vegan cake, we didn't use butter. And then we're going to put everything in the oven. Let's get baking. So we're going to make 3 different kinds of cake today. But we're going to end up with just 2 cakes because the cake that Tegan and I make, we're going to actually make a double layer out of them. I'm going to make a cake that has a lemon flavor. Tegan's going to make one that has an orange flavor, so those 2 citruses will go together. Madison, your cake will be a standalone cake because it's going to have a coffee flavor, and it'll actually be one of the more complex flavor combinations. We're going to add a couple of different seasonings to it. But all 3 of these cakes are going to be vegan.
What does vegan mean?
Vegan simply means that you produce food without the use of any animal products. So everything that we're gonna make here comes from things that come from either trees or the ground. It's all plant-based, there's no animal products. There's no butter, there's no milk, there are no eggs. So we're going to have to make sure that the ingredients we choose replicate the textures and the mouthfeel and the end result so that it feels and looks like a cake that you would recognize, but is much healthier and a lot more sustainable and easier on our budgets as well. So the first step is to get some flour. We've got some whole wheat flour. I've gone ahead and I've put 1 cup of flour in each of your bowls. For this recipe, we actually need 2 cups of flour, so I'm going to show you how we do that. Because this flour is just regular, all-purpose whole wheat flour, we need to sift it. Sifting just helps you clarify the powder. It gives you a thinner, more powdery flour. And you basically just put it in and shake it like that. Make sure that you don't get any lumps, and it gives you a much finer end product. So Madison, I'm going to hand that to you. And I'm going to give you a scoop of flour that I've leveled off. Thank you. Pour that in and go ahead and sift. Easy. Try to keep it all in the bowl. Very nice. You can use your hand to hit it like that. That keeps it in the bowl and helps you not make too much of a mess. Nice. All right, give the sifter to Tegan. And Tegan, I'm going to use the same technique and give you a level cup. You ready? Same technique Madison used. You're right-handed, so go ahead and use your, yep.
It got on my arm.
I think you'll survive.
I'm not good at this.
Very good. All right. Put that to the side. The next thing we need is a teaspoon of baking powder. Now, the reason we use baking powder is so that we can get the cake to rise, get the cake to be fluffy and airy and light. So we're going to take 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Not 1 teaspoon, not a heaping teaspoon. Otherwise, your cake will come out tasting like baking soda. Tegan? 1 regular teaspoon. Okay. Great. I'll take that back. The next thing we need is 3/4 of a cup of sweetener. In this case, we're going to use sugar.
Sugar.
Yeah.
I'm gonna eat it.
So I've got 1/2 cup of sugar.
I thought people who are
And-
vegetarians don't eat
Vegetarians do eat sugar.
Oh.
They don't eat things that come from animals. So there are some vegans who wouldn't eat honey because honey is technically an animal product. People who are strict vegans wouldn't consume honey, but not all vegans subscribe to that. So we've got 1/2 and then we've got 1/4. That gives us 3/4 total, 3/4 of a cup
Mine?
of sugar. And then you go ahead and do the same thing. Scoop out your,
Oops.
let's do that a little slower.
That.
Let's use 2 hands, we get a full 1/2 cup. Very good. Make sure that it's full. Okay, that's good.
That one?
Go ahead.
That's good?
Mm-hmm. And then, now Tegan, we're gonna do things a little bit differently for you. Instead of using the granulated sugar, we're gonna use a healthier option. We're gonna use some of this amber agave. There's a couple of reasons. One, just to demonstrate that there's ways to sweeten our cakes that don't use refined sugar. Refined sugar is not great for you, but you know, sometimes a little sweetener is fun. But in the case of yours, your cake is going to naturally be sweeter than what Madison and I do because you're going to use orange juice in your cake, which is already very sweet. So we don't want an overly sweet cake. So I'm gonna give you
What is that called again?
1/2 cup of amber
Is that honey?
agave. It is not honey.
What is that?
This comes from a plant, from an agave plant. It is a low glycemic sweetener. Glycemic index refers to the way that a sweetener interacts with your blood sugar. So you know how Nana and Papa have diabetes? So if we sweeten the cake with this, it will be better for them. It won't trigger their diabetes as aggressively as the cake that Madison and I have made that used white refined sugar. So it's a little bit healthier option because the body can respond to it and process it much easier if you're a diabetic. So go ahead and we'll add that.
Wow,
We'll
that's
give you
cool.
1
That looks
and
cool. Honey looking stuff.
yeah. Okay,
Only 1.
just 1 because again he's going to use orange juice. We're
Mine's
using water.
coolest.
Now, the next step is we're going to go ahead and add a teaspoon of vanilla. Now, Madison, only you and I are going to add the vanilla. And actually, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons.
Can I put?
But you got to go slowly so that you don't spill it, and you measure carefully.
It smells
We're going to
good.
use 2. It does smell good, doesn't it?
Yeah. Smell like definitely vanilla.
And we're using real vanilla. This vanilla I like a lot because it's a vanilla out of Madagascar in Africa. There are lots of different types of vanilla, but the important thing is that we try to use real vanilla extract. Tegan, we're not going to use vanilla in yours simply because you've got orange juice flavor, so that's going to be enough of a flavor profile.
Yeah, it wouldn't. I don't know if it would mix good orange juice.
Now, for my cake, because I want it to be flavored with lemon, I'm actually going to take the zest of this lemon and add it to my cake mix. I'm going to use about a tablespoon worth of lemon zest.
Why don't you use this?
Come smell that.
Ooh, lemon. Nice. It smells good. And it looks good.
The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the juice of half a lemon and add it to my cake.
What does that do?
It just takes the lemon and juices it more easily for me and keeps the seeds out.
Mm.
So you see how it collects at the bottom there like that?
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
When did we get this? When was that?
So see? It allows us to get
all the lemon juices out. Can I eat the lemon?
Maybe later. So we'll add some lemon juice to the cake. And Tegan, we're gonna go ahead and give you a little bit of the lemon zest just to amplify the citrus components of your cake when we go to add the orange juice, because the lemon and the orange will go together nicely.
Is it a teaspoon or just a little?
It's about a teaspoon.
You said we were making 2 cakes, but we have 3 bowls.
Right, because one of the cakes is gonna have 2 layers.
Oh.
Okay. At this point, we're ready to add our seasoning or our flavoring components to Madison's cake that we're not adding to Tegan and mine. So Madison,
Coffee.
I'm going to give you
Okay.
a tablespoon of espresso powder.
Go
ahead.
There.
Add that in. And in fact, why don't we go ahead and do 2 tablespoons so we get a really nice, rich coffee flavor.
Okay.
Now, to go along with the vanilla and the coffee, we're going to add an interesting spice called cardamom. This is an Indian spice. You'll find this spice a lot of times in Indian cuisine. People who hail from India, and a lot of their different dishes, a lot of their curries and things like that will use cardamom. A lot of their cakes also will use cardamom. I personally like to add cardamom to my coffee. When I make up myself a latte, I use cardamom often. So we're going to add 1 teaspoon worth of cardamom. So we're adding less cardamom than we added vanilla or coffee. So we're layering the flavors and we're controlling what you taste the most. We want the coffee to stand out the most, then the vanilla, then the cardamom, so that we have layered notes.
Minty.
And then lastly, Madison, we're going to add just a little bit of cinnamon.
Why cinnamon?
It'll add a warm flavor, a warm component, and cinnamon can often help coffee taste more like coffee.
Oh.
Okay,
Smells good.
so now we've got our dry measures together. Now we're going to go ahead and add the liquid, which is going to take our flour from being, just a bunch of dry ingredients and turn it into a batter, which is what we need to make a cake. So Tegan, we're going to start with you.
Yay.
And we're going to add in our liquid measures to your cake. In your case, we're going to add in the orange juice. So for the orange juice, we want to add, and I'm going to measure this out for you, we want to add 3/4 cup of orange juice. We're using measuring cups and measuring spoons because when you bake, unlike when you cook, like when we're making dinner and lunch on top of the stove, when you're going to put things in the oven, being more exact and more precise with your measurements really matters, because baking a cake is like the science project. If you don't measure it out correctly, you won't end up with the proper end result.
They have bubbles.
Yeah. Madison, for your cake and for my cake, we're just going to add water.
Is it because your thing's already in it?
Nope, it's because we don't want to interrupt the flavor that we've got going on. The orange juice is giving your cake flavor. We've already added flavor to ours.
Mine smells pretty good. Whoa.
And now,
I can smell the coffee now.
Yep.
Can I smell? I smell minty from that. Oh, it smells so good. From that thing with the green in it. Mine doesn't smell as good.
All right. Now the fun part.
Funny.
Fun or messy, depending on how good you guys are at this.
Pretty bad.
We're gonna go ahead and mix this up and create our batter. Ready? We're gonna start off slow. Hold the bowl with your other hand, and then we're gonna turn it up a little bit. Start off slow, get it incorporated. Go all around. Now that we've got them mixed, each of our cakes, from the orange to the coffee to the lemon, are put into our pre-greased baking pans, and we're going to throw these into the oven. We've got our cakes in the oven, and in about 30 to 40 minutes, we should be ready to assemble. All right, Tegan. So while the cakes finish cooling, we've taken them out of the oven. While the cakes finish cooling, why don't we go ahead and make our icing? We actually need 2 different icings since we have 2 different cakes, but both of them start with the same base. So we're going to start with the plain icing that we'll use for our that we'll use for our coffee cake, and we're going to use a coconut cream. So I'm going to give you all of the measurements into the bowl and have you do the mixing. How's that sound?
Good.
All right. So we're going to take 1 cup of coconut cream. So this is the kind of cream that we would use to make pina coladas, virgin pina coladas in your case. But it's also very useful for, like we're doing right now, making all sorts of things that you would ordinarily use a butter or a cream for. This is a very good option.
What's a virgin pina colada?
A virgin pina colada is one that a kid can have because it has no alcohol.
Oh.
We're going to add just a little bit of vanilla, just a dash. And then we're gonna go ahead and add a 1/4 cup of sugar. Why don't you go ahead and give that a mix? Remembering to start on a low setting, holding the bowl with your other hand. Go ahead, just get it to warm. Now this is going to take a while to whip up. You want to get it to be a nice, thick consistency. I'm going to give you a little more speed. Okay, to this we just added a little bit of strawberry jam. So now that we got the plain one done and separated, let's add our strawberry and go ahead and give that a little mix.
1 or 2?
Start it slow and then we'll speed it back up. Okay. Our cakes have cooled. We've pulled them out. So we've got your orange base. We've got my lemon based cake. And what we're gonna do now is we're going to layer them and then ice them. So first off, we'll take the icing mix that you made and we'll pour it in the center, and we'll just give it a nice spread. give it a little bit more. And that'll help seal these two layers together.
Is that why we made the icing?
Yep. Well, for the middle and
The top?
the top, exactly. So it's nice to get icing on two different places. And now we'll just go ahead, take out the other cake. In this cake we'll put flat side to flat side. And now if you want to just take that icing and pour it directly in the center.
Sure.
Just a little to start off with. Go slow. In the center. Just get it to swirl around. Okay. Good. We'll let it run down.
Looks good.
And we're going to add some more.
It's perfectly on the side of the it's right on the side of the
Yeah. It's a little messy, but that's all right. So this is giving us a nice glaze.
It smells really good.
Yeah. Okay. We'll set this cake aside. And then we'll do the same thing to Madison's cake. Except we'll do it with the other icing.
Other icing? Oh, yeah, there's other icing.
That's right, there's the plain version. Now because Madison's cake isn't a citrus cake, it has a different flavor profile, we're not gonna use a strawberry jam icing. We're gonna go ahead and use just the plain version that we separated that you mixed together. We're gonna just use that. And again, we're gonna pour it right down the middle.
That looks good.
And we'll just let it swirl. And this is just a coconut cream with a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of sugar for sweetness. And now we'll just give these a chance to set up because we need to let the icing cool, the cake to cool a little bit further. And then we will cut and taste them. So both of our cakes have cooled down. They're sufficiently glazed. We've got a coconut cream with a little cinnamon topping for our coffee cake. And then we've got a strawberry coconut with a little bit of lemon zest layered cake for our citrus version. All right, guys, let's give it a taste test. Sweet. The lemon and the strawberry come through. Let's see what our coffee cake tastes like. Well, cinnamon notes are really good. It's sweet, it's spicy. You want to taste some of this, Tegan? Of the two, I think the coffee might be my favorite.
This one kind of just like the air cake we made last time.
It does.
Yeah.
And they're all vegan. Nicely done, Madison. So I want to thank my special guests, Madison and Tegan, my niece and nephew, for their help and delivering a nice vegan recipe. Both of the cakes that we made today could be augmented with flavors. You could add chocolate to them, you could add mint to one of them, you could add blueberries or seasonal fruits. But the main point is that with just flour, sugar, and water, you can actually make a cake even if you don't have access to a ton of ingredients, a local grocery store, and still be health conscious and follow a vegan or vegan friendly diet. These kinds of ideas, these kinds of things are important as we talk about Afro-veganism and we talk about food resistance and standing up to capitalism and the ill effects that Black and brown neighborhoods have faced from things like racist real estate practices, redlining, and the historic systemic racism that has infiltrated every aspect of Black American life, including our food. Thanks for joining us. I hope that you try out these recipes, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Pan-African Family Cooking Show. Ukusu.